Book 2, Part 3 of The Art of War by Niccolo Machiavelli, translated by Henry Neville. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Clive Catterall. Book 2, Part 3. I say to you, therefore, that it is more important than anything to have soldiers who know how to form themselves quickly, and it is necessary in holding them in these companies to train them thoroughly, and have them proceed bravely forward or backward, to pass through difficult places without disturbing the order. For the soldiers who know how to do this well are experienced soldiers, and although they may have never met the enemy face to face, they can be called seasoned soldiers. And, on the contrary, those who do not know how to maintain this order, even if they have been in 1,000 wars, ought always to be considered as new soldiers. This applies in forming them when they are marching in small files, but if they are formed and then become broken because of some accident that results either from the location or from the enemy, to reorganize themselves immediately is the important and difficult thing, in which much training and practice is needed, and in which the ancients placed much emphasis. It is necessary, therefore, to do two things. First, to have many countersigns in the company. The other, always to keep this arrangement, that the same infantry always remain in the same file. For instance, if one is commanded to be in the second file, he will afterwards always stay there, and not only in this same file, but in the same position in the file. It is to be observed, as I have said, how necessary are the great number of countersigns, so that, coming together with other companies, it may be reorganized by its own men. Secondly, that the constable and centurion have tufts of feathers on their headdress, different and recognizable, and, what is more important, to arrange that the heads of 10 be recognized. To which the ancients paid very much attention, that nothing else would do but that they wrote numbers on their bucklers, calling then the first, second, third, fourth, etc. And they were not above content with this, but each soldier had to write on his shield the number of his file, and the number of his place assigned him in that file. The men, therefore, being thus countersigned, and accustomed to stay within these limits, if they should be disorganized, it is easy to reorganize them all quickly. For the flag staying fixed, the centurions and heads of 10 can judge their place by eye, and bring the left from the right, or the right from the left, with the usual distance between. The infantry, guided by their rules and by the difference in countersigns, can quickly take their proper places, just as if you were the staves of a barrel which you had first countersigned. I would wager you would put the barrel back together with great ease, but if you had not countersigned the staves, it is impossible to reassemble the barrel. This system, with diligence and practice, can be taught quickly, and can be quickly learned, and once learned, are forgotten with difficulty. For new men are guided by the old, and in time a province which has such training would become entirely expert in war. It is also necessary to teach them to turn in step, and do so when he should turn from the flanks and by the shoulders to the front, or from the front to the flanks or shoulders. This is very easy, for it is sufficient only that each man turn his body towards the side he is commanded to, and the direction in which they are turned becomes the front. It is true that when they turn by the flank, the ranks which turn go outside their usual area, because there is a small space between the breast to the shoulder, while from one flank to the other there is much space, which is all contrary to the regular formation of the company. Hence, care should be used in employing it. But this is more important, and where more practice is needed, is when a company wants to turn entirely, as if it was a solid body. Here great care and practice must be employed, for if it is desired to turn to the left, for instance, it is necessary that the left wing be halted, and those who are closer to the halted one march much slower than those who are on the right wing, and have to run. Otherwise everything would be in confusion. But, as it always happens when an army marches from place to place, that the companies not situated in front, not having to combat at the front, or at the flanks or shoulders, have to move from the flank or shoulder quickly to the front. And when such companies, in such cases, have the space necessary, as we indicated above, it is necessary that the pikemen they have on that flank become the front, and the heads of 10 centurions and constables belonging to it relocate to their proper places. Therefore, in wanting to do this, when forming them, it is necessary to arrange the 80 files of 5 per file, placing all the pikemen in the first 20 files, and placing 5 at the heads of 10 in front of them, and 5 in the rear. The other 60 files situated behind are all shield-bearers, who total to 300. It should therefore be so arranged that the first and last file of every 100 are heads of 10. The constable with his flag and bugler be in the middle of the first 100 of shield-bearers, and the centurions at the head of every century. Thus arranged, when you want the pikemen to be on the left flank, you have to double them century by century from the right flank. If you want them to be on the right flank, you have to double them from the left. And thus the company turns, with the pikemen on the flank, with the heads of 10 on the front and rear, with the centurions at the front of them, and the constable in the middle. Which formation holds when going forward. But when the enemy comes, and the time for the companies to move from the flanks to the front, it cannot be done unless all the soldiers face towards the flank where the pikemen are, and then the company is turned, with its files and heads, in that manner that was described above. For the centurions being on the outside, and all the men in their places, the centurions quickly enter the ranks without difficulty. But when they are marching frontwards, and have to combat in the rear, they must arrange the files so that, in forming the company, the pikes are situated in the rear. And to do this, no other order has to be maintained, except that where in the formation of the company ordinarily every century has 5 files of pikemen in front, it now has them behind. But in all other parts, observe the order that I have mentioned. Cosimo said, "You have said, if I remember well, that this method of training is to enable them to form these companies into an army, and that this training serves to enable them to be arranged within it. But if it should occur that these 450 infantry have to operate as a separate party, how would you arrange them?" Fabrizio said, "I will now guide you in judging where he wants to place the pikes, and who should carry them, which is not in any way contrary to the arrangement mentioned above. For although it may be the method that is observed when, together with other companies, it comes to an engagement, none the less it is a rule that serves for all those methods in which it should happen that you have to manage it. But in showing you the other 2 methods for arranging the companies proposed by me, I will also better satisfy your question, for either they are never used, or they are used when the company is alone, and not in the company of others. And to come to the method of forming it with 2 horns or wings, I say that you ought to arrange the 80 files at 5 per file in this way. Place a centurion in the middle, and behind him 25 files that have 2 pikemen each on the left side, and 3 shield-bearers on the right. And after the first 5, in the next 20 heads of 10 be placed, all between the pikemen and shield-bearers, except that those heads who carry pikes stay with the pikemen. Behind these 25 files thusly arranged, another centurion is placed, who has 15 files of shield-bearers behind him. After these, the constable between the flag and the bugler, who also has behind him another 15 files of shield-bearers. The third centurion is placed behind these, and he has 25 files behind him, in each of which are 3 shield-bearers on the left side, and 2 pikemen on the right. And after the first 5 files are 20 heads of 10 placed between the pikemen and the shield-bearers. After these files there is the 4th centurion. If it is desired, therefore, to arrange these files to form a company with 2 horns or wings, the 1st centurion has to be halted with the 25 files which are behind him. The 2nd centurion then has to be moved with the 15 shield-bearers who are on his rear, and turning to the right, and on the right flank of the 25 files, to proceed so far that he comes to the 15 files, and here he halts. After, the constable has to be moved with the 15 files of shield-bearers who are behind, and turning towards the right, over by the right flank of the 15 files which were moved first, marches so that he comes to their front, and here he halts. After, move the 3rd centurion with the 25 files and with the 4th centurion who is behind them, and turning to the right, march by the left flank of the last 15 files of shield-bearers, and he does not halt until he is at the head of them, but continues marching up until the last files of 25 are in line with the files behind. And having done this, the centurion who was the head of the first 15 files of shield-bearers leaves the place where he was, and goes to the hour of the left angle. And thus he will turn a company of 25 solid files, of 20 infantry per file, with 2 wings on each side of his front, and there will remain a space between them, as much as would be occupied by 10 men side by side. The captain will be between the 2 wings, and a centurion in each corner of the wing. There will be 2 files of pikemen, and 20 heads of 10 on each flank. These 2 wings serve to hold between them the artillery, whenever the company has any with it, and the carriages. The veleti have to stay along the flanks beneath the pikemen. But in wanting to bring this wing-formed company into the form of a piazza or plaza, nothing else need be done than to take 8 of the 15 files of 20 per file, and place them between the points of the 2 horns or wings, which then from wings become the rear shoulder of the piazza or plaza. The carriages are kept in this plaza, and the captain and the flag there, but not the artillery, which is put either in the front or along the flanks. These are the methods which can be used by a company when it has to pass by suspicious places by itself. None the less, the solid company, without wings and without the plaza, is best. But in wanting to make safe the disarmed ones, the winged one is necessary. The Swiss also have many forms of companies, among which they form one into the manner of a cross, as in the spaces between the arms they keep their gunners safe from the attacks of the enemy. But since such companies are good in fighting by themselves, and my intention is to show how several companies united together combat with the enemy, I do not belabour myself further in describing it. Cosimo said, "And it appears to me I have very well comprehended the method that ought to be employed in training the men in these companies. But, if I remember well, you said that in addition to the 10 companies in a battalion, you would add 1,000 extraordinary pikemen, and 400 extraordinary veleti. Would you not describe how to train these?" Fabrizio said, "I would, and with the greatest diligence. And I would train the pikemen group by group, at least in the formation of the companies, as the others. For I would serve myself of these more than of the ordinary companies in all the particular actions, how to escort, to raid, and such things. But the veleti I would train at home, without bringing them together with the others. For, as it is their office to combat brokenly, in the open or separately, it is not as necessary that they come together with the others, or to train in common exercises, than to train them well in particular exercises. They ought, therefore, as was said in the beginning, and now it appears to me laborious to repeat it, to train their own men in these companies, so that they know how to maintain their ranks, know their places, return there quickly when either the evening or the location disrupts them. For when this is caused to be done, they can easily be taught the place the company has to hold, and what its office should be in the armies. And if a prince or a republic works hard and puts diligence in these formations and in this training, it will always happen that there will be good soldiers in that country, and they will be superior to their neighbours, and will be those who give and not receive laws from other men. But, as I have told you, the disorder in which one exists causes them to disregard and not to esteem these things, and therefore our training is not good. And even if there should be some heads or members naturally of virtue, they are unable to demonstrate it." Cosimo said, "What carriages would you want each of these companies to have?" Fabrizio said, The first thing I would want is that the centurions or the heads of 10 should not go on horseback, and if the constables want to ride mounted, I would want them to have a mule and not a horse. I would permit them 2 carriages, and 1 to each centurion, and 2 to every 3 heads of 10, for they would quarter so many in each encampment, as we will narrate in its proper place, so that each company would have 36 carriages, which I would have to carry the necessary tents, cooking utensils, hatchets, digging bars, sufficient to make the encampment, and after that anything else of convenience. Cosimo said, I believe that heads assigned by you in each of the companies are necessary. None the less, I would be apprehensive that so many commanders would be confusing. Fabrizio said, they would be so if I would refer to one, but as I refer to many, they make for order. And actually, without those orders, it would be impossible to control them, for a wall which inclines on every side would need many and frequent supports, even if they are not so strong. But if few, they must be strong. For the virtue of only one, despite its spacing, can remedy any ruin. And so it must be that in the armies, and among every 10 men, there is one of more life, more heart, or at least more authority, who with his courage with words and by example keeps the others firm and disposed to fight. And these things mentioned by me, as the heads, the flags, the buglers, are necessary in an army, and it is seen that we have all these in our present-day armies, but no one does his duty. First, the heads of 10, in desiring that those things be done because they are ordered, it is necessary, as I have said, for each of them to have his men separate, lodge with them, go into action with them, stay in the ranks with them. For when they are in their proper places, they are all of mind and temperament to maintain the ranks straight and firm, and it is impossible for them to become disrupted, or if they become disrupted, do not quickly reform their ranks. But today they do not serve us for anything other than to give them more pay than the others, and to have them do some particular thing. The same happens with the flags, for they are kept rather to make a beautiful show than for any military use. But the ancients served themselves of it as a guide and to reorganize themselves, for everyone, when the flag was standing firm, knew the place he had to be near his flag, and always returned there. He also knew that if it were moving or standing still, he had to move or halt. It is necessary in an army, therefore, that there be many bodies, and that each body have its own flag and its own guide. For if they have this, it needs must be that they have much courage, and consequently are livelier. The infantry, therefore, ought to march according to the flag, and the flag move according to the bugle call, which call, if given well, commands the army, which, proceeding in step with those, comes to serve the orders easily. Whence the ancients, having whistles, pipes, fifes, and bugles, controlled them perfectly. For as he who dances proceeds in time with the music, and keeping with it does not make a misstep, so an army obedient in its movement to that call will not become disorganized. And therefore they varied the calls according as they wanted to enkindle or quiet or firm the spirits of men. And as the sounds were various, so they named them variously. The Doric call brought on constancy, frigio, fury or boldness. Whence they tell that Alexander, being at table, and someone sounding the frigio call, it so excited his spirit that he took up arms. It would be necessary to rediscover all these methods, and if this is difficult, it ought not at least to be totally put aside by those who teach the soldiers to obey, which each one can vary and arrange in his own way, so long as with practice he accustoms the ears of his soldiers to recognize them. But today no benefit is gotten from these sounds in great part other than to make noise. Cosimo said, I would desire to learn from you, if you have ever pondered this with yourself, whence such baseness and disorganization arises, and such negligence of this training in our times. Fabrizio said, I will tell you willingly what I think. You know, of the men excellent in war, there have been many famed in Europe, few in Africa, and less in Asia. This results from the fact that these last two parts of the world have had a principality or two, and few republics. But Europe alone has had some kingdoms and an infinite number of republics. And men become excellent and show their virtue according as they are employed and recognized by their prince, republic, or king, whichever it may be. It happens, therefore, that where there is much power, many valiant men spring up; where there is little, few. In Asia there are found Ninus, Cyrus, Artaphursus, Mithridates, and very few others to accompany these. In Africa there are noted, omitting those of ancient Egypt, Maximinus, Jugurtha, and those captains who are raised by the Carthaginian Republic, and these are very few compared to those of Europe. For in Europe there are excellent men without number, and there would be many more, if there should be named together with them those others who have been forgotten by the malignity of the time, since the world has been more virtuous when there have been many states which have favoured virtue, either from necessity or from other human passion. Few men, therefore, spring up in Asia, because as that province was entirely subject to one kingdom, in which, because of its greatness, there was indolence for the most part, it could not give rise to excellent men in activity. The same happened in Africa, yet several, with respect to the Carthaginian Republic, did arise. More excellent men come out of republics than from kingdoms, because in the former virtue is honoured much of the time, in the kingdom it is feared. Whence it results that in the former men of virtue are raised, in the latter they are extinguished. Whoever, therefore, considers the part of Europe will find it to have been full of republics and principalities, which, from the fear one had of the other, were constrained to keep alive their military organizations, and honour those who greatly prevailed in them. For in Greece, in addition to the kingdoms of the Macedonians, there were many republics, and many most excellent men arose in each of them. In Italy there were the Romans, the Samnites, the Tuscans, the Cisalpine Gauls. France and Germany were full of republics and princes. Spain the very same. And although in comparison with the Romans very few others were noted, it resulted from the malignity of the writers, who pursued fortune, and to whom it was often enough to honour the victors. For it is not reasonable that among the Samnites and Tuscans, who fought 50 years with the Roman people before they were defeated, many excellent men should not have sprung up. And so likewise in France and Spain. But that virtue which the writers do not commemorate in particular men, they commemorate generally in the peoples, in which they exalt to the stars the obstinacy which existed in them in defending their liberty. It is true, therefore, that where there are many empires, more valiant men spring up, and it follows of necessity that those being extinguished, little by little virtue is extinguished, as there is less reason which causes men to become virtuous. And as the Roman Empire afterwards kept growing, and having extinguished all the republics and principalities of Europe and Africa, and in greater part those of Asia, no other path to virtue was left except Rome. Whence it resulted that men of virtue began to be few in Europe as in Asia, which virtue ultimately came to decline. For all the virtue being brought to Rome, and as it was corrupted, so almost the whole world came to be corrupted, and the Scythian people were able to come to plunder that empire, which had extinguished the virtue of others, but did not know how to maintain its own. And although afterwards that empire, because of the inundation of those barbarians, became divided into several parts, this virtue was not renewed. First, because a price is paid to recover institutions when they are spoiled; another, because the mode of living today, with regard to the Christian religion, does not impose that necessity to defend it that anciently existed, in which, at the time, men defeated in war were either put to death or remained slaves in perpetuity, where they led lives of misery. The conquered lands were either desolated or the inhabitants driven out, their goods taken away, and they were sent dispersed throughout the world, so that those overcome in war suffered every last misery. Men were terrified from the fear of this, and they kept their military exercises alive, and honoured those who were excellent in them. But today this fear in large part is lost, and few of the defeated are put to death, and no one is kept prisoner long, for they are easily liberated. The citizens, although they should rebel 1,000 times, are not destroyed. Goods are left to their people, so that the greatest evil that is feared is a ransom, so that men do not want to subject themselves to dangers which they little fear. Afterwards, these provinces of Europe exist under very few heads as compared to the past, for all of France obeys a king, all of Spain another, and Italy exists in a few parts, so that weak cities defend themselves by allying themselves with the victors, and strong states, for the reasons mentioned, do not fear an ultimate ruin. Cosimo said, "And in the last 25 years many towns have been seen to be pillaged and lost their kingdoms, which examples ought to teach others to live and reassume some of the ancient orders." Fabrizio said, "That is what you say, but if you would note which towns are pillaged, you would not find them to be the chief ones of the state, but only members, as is seen in the sacking of Tortona and not Milan, Capua and not Naples, Brescia and not Venice, Ravenna and not Rome. Which examples do not cause the present thinking which governs to change. Rather, it causes them to remain in that opinion of being able to recover themselves by ransom. And because of this, they do not want to subject themselves to the bother of military training, as it appears to them partly unnecessary, partly a tangle they do not understand. Those others who are slave, to whom such examples ought to cause fear, do not have the power of remedying their situation, and those princes who have lost the state are no longer in time, and those who have the state do not have military training or want it, for they want, without any hardship, to remain in power through fortune, not through their own virtue, and who see that, because there is so little virtue, fortune governs everything, and they want it to master them, not they master it. And that which I have discussed is true, consider Germany, in which, because there are many principalities and republics, there is much virtue, and all that is good in our present army depends on the example of those people, who, being completely jealous of their state, as they fear servitude, which elsewhere is not feared, maintain and honour themselves all as lords. I want this to suffice to have said in showing the reasons for the present business according to my opinion. I do not know if it appears the same to you, or if some other apprehension should have arisen from this discussion. Cosimo said, "None. Rather, I am most satisfied with everything. I desire above, returning to our principal subject, to learn from you how you would arrange the cavalry with these companies, and how many, how captained, and how armed." Fabrizio said, "And it, perhaps, appears to you that I have omitted these, at which do not be surprised, for I speak little of them for two reasons. One, because this part of the army is less corrupt than that of the infantry, for it is not stronger than the ancient, it is on a par with it. However, a short while before, the method of training them has been mentioned, and as to arming them, I would arm them as is presently done, both as to the light cavalry as to the men-at-arms. But I would want the light cavalry to be all archers, with some light gunners among them, who, although of little use in other actions of war, are most useful in terrifying the peasants, and place them above a pass that is to be guarded by them, for one gunner causes more fear to the enemy than 20 other armed men. And as to numbers, I say that departing from imitating the Roman army, I would have not less than 300 effective cavalry for each battalion, of which I would want 150 to be men-at-arms, and 150 light cavalry. And I would give a leader to each of these parts, creating among them 15 heads of 10 per hand, and give each one a flag and a bugler. I would want that every 10 men-at-arms to have 5 carriages, and every 10 light cavalrymen 2, which, like those of the infantry, should carry the tents, cooking utensils, hitches, poles, and in addition over the others, their tools. And do not think this is out of place, seeing that men-at-arms have 4 horses at their service, and that such a practice is a corrupting one. For in Germany it is seen that those men-at-arms are alone with their horses, and only every 20 have a cart, which carries the necessary things behind them. The horsemen of the Romans were likewise alone. It is true that the triarii encamped near the cavalry, and were obliged to render aid to it in the handling of the horses. This can easily be imitated by us, as will be shown in the distribution of quarters. That, therefore, which the Romans did, and that which the Germans do, we also can do. And in not doing it, we make a mistake. These cavalrymen, enrolled and organized together with a battalion, can often be assembled when the companies are assembled, and caused to make some semblance of attack among them, which should be done more so that they be recognized among them than for any necessity. But I have said enough on this subject for now, and let us descend to forming an army which is able to offer battle to the enemy, and hope to win it, which is the end for which an army is organized, and so much study put into it. End of Book 2.